Hi, Yinnies. Welcome back to a Yin Yoga podcast. If you are new around here, welcome. And we haven't met before. My name is Nick Danu. I'm your host. I'm a certified yoga therapist, a mentor of yoga teachers, a Yin Yoga teacher trainer, and a total Yin Yoga geek. So I have a 60 plus hour therapeutic Yin training. That's one way that I serve teachers. And I also offer yoga business mentorship, which most people would use the word consulting or coaching. I don't like it, either of those words. So I say mentorship. So that's the work that I do with teachers. So if you're interested in any of that, more info about any of that, I will put links, of course, in the episode notes below. So if you're new, welcome. That's me in a nutshell. Welcome back to returning listeners. Before we get started, a couple of reminders. That these are adult conversations, which may include difficult subject matter and colorful language. So if you are sensitive to colorful language, you may want to stop listening. And if you have small people around, take a moment to put some headphones in now. Another thing to note is that if you didn't know, dear listener, if you're listening to this, that I have the full unedited versions of these available on YouTube. So if you are a watcher rather than a listener, you can check them out on YouTube. They're, again, unedited. I just literally upload them as is. The link to that, again, is all in the show notes. So if you want to watch rather than listen, then that's always available to you. Okay, let's get into today's topic. So today's topic is on advanced yin yoga. I often will see this come up in yoga teacher Facebook groups, asking about how to create an advanced yin yoga practice. And I also had a request for this. And if you didn't know, dear listener, I'm happy to take requests for things that you want to hear about. So if you have ideas of things you would love me to cover on the podcast, please don't hesitate to find me on Instagram, either through Yin Yoga Podcast or at Nick Danu Yoga, and just send me a DM and let me know what you'd like me to talk about. So if you have subject ideas, if you have questions that are plaguing you, I'm happy to add those to the list. Please feel free. So this was one that came up on advanced Yin Yoga. So we will dive into this concept in a moment as it connects to yin. But before we go there, I just want to talk a little bit about this concept of advanced yoga in general. So in the yogaverse, the Western yogaverse that we are all probably part of, yoga has been taken from its original intent and has been turned into a bunch of funny shapes that you make with your body. And so most of the time that when teachers are asking this question, they're talking about the asana or the shapes. They're talking about these pretzel-y poses that we make with our body. And they're wanting to know about advanced asana. So here is some problems with that concept. First of all, what is an advanced asana to one person might be completely simple to another. So there is no way to say, this is an advanced pose and this is a beginner pose. For example, one person could be super comfortable sitting on the floor in meditation, and another person could really struggle with that, just even sitting cross-legged. And yet that same person that has trouble sitting cross-legged could do a handstand in the middle of the room, but can't sit still and quiet on the floor in meditation. So which one is the advanced yogi? These are the questions we will ponder. So first, I think we need to have a definition and an understanding and probably a drastic reframing of what advanced yoga is. So the reason that this is so important, especially when it comes to yin yoga, is because yin as a concept is so different and the practice is so different. So let's just go from the framework of the teachers asking this question are probably referring to asana, which is already problematic. What is advanced asana? If you have not studied the work of Paul Grilly, my teacher, Mr. Yin Yoga, and you have not watched his presentation on skeletal variation, it's called Anatomy for Yoga. There is a link in the notes to grab that. If you're teaching yin yoga and you have not watched that presentation, you need to do that right away, because everything as far as the physical practice and teaching the physical practice is based on that information. Now, any yoga teacher can watch that information. It's not a yin specific program, but the lectures and all of that are the foundation of Paul Grilly's work on skeletal variations. And so if you're teaching yin and you have not purchased that and watched it, you need to do that, because that will clear up some of what I'm about to say. So the first thing I would say when we're talking about advanced yoga is that there is no such thing as, if you just keep practicing, eventually you'll be able to do all the poses. That is a lie. That is not true. We all have different bones on the inside. And so some of us have bones that allow us to do these pretzel-y type poses with a fair bit of ease. In fact, some of those people could probably do most of those before they even started practicing yoga, just based on their own particular body type, their own body proportions, their own bone structure. And then there are people who have been practicing yoga for decades who won't be able to do some of these, air quotes for those of you listening, advanced yoga asanas based on their bone structure or their body proportions. So the first myth that we need to pick apart here, or actually, I'd rather stab it to death, is that this silliness that we have in the yoga world, that if you just keep practicing poses, that eventually you will be able to do the advanced version. You may or may not ever be able to do these fancy, flashy poses that you see on Instagram and on the cover of a yoga magazine. And whether or not you're ever able to do those depends on your particular body, because we are all unique, magical individuals. If you have a bone structure that lends well to those poses, and you start practicing yoga and you, within the first little while, build up some strength and get rid of surface tension in the muscles so that you're able to move to your full range, and you have a large range in your particular bone structure, then maybe doing some of these, air quotes, advanced poses actually won't be that hard for you. They'll feel kind of natural, fairly easy. If, however, you have a bone structure that doesn't yield well to that particular pose that you have in your mind as an advanced asana, then you will never be able to do that pose. And it doesn't matter how much yoga you practice, it will never happen, because your bones will limit you. Now, this can sound sort of negative or like defeatist or kind of sad, but actually, when I found out that my bones had been limiting me in a couple of poses, I felt grateful, because it explained why I wasn't getting any further in these poses. And then it allowed me to go, oh, okay, so I'm not really built for that pose. So I'll just let it slide and I'll do a different pose that has the same benefits as that one that works for my particular bone structure and body. So that's the first thing to tease apart. And I'll use my own body as an example. So in my shoulders, if I were to interlace my hands behind my back and then try to pull my hands away from my sacrum, I have very little range of motion before I hit my acromion process in my shoulder with my hands that narrow. Now, if I can use a strap and widen my hands, I can get a lot deeper, but still not a huge range of motion. Okay, how is this relevant? Well, if you look at poses like shoulder stand and plow pose or snail in yin, And you think that everyone should be able to do that. Well, guess what? I can't. And it's based on my bone structure. I can't, when I bring my hands underneath my body, pull my weight of my body off of my neck enough that I can practice it safely because of this bony limitation in my shoulders. So I can only lift up and off of my neck so far because I hit bone on bone in my shoulder joint, which then means there's no further to go. Once your bones are hitting, that's it. That's all she wrote. And so for years and years and years, I thought that I couldn't do shoulder stand well, and I couldn't do plow pose because I had air quotes, tight shoulders, meaning my deltoid muscles. I thought that these muscles, these caps of my shoulders, were what was restricting me. And truth be told, there is and was some tightness there, but not to the degree that it was limiting me. And how I knew that that wasn't the case once I learned about skeletal variation from my teacher, Paul, how I knew it wasn't that is because I wasn't feeling any stretch. I was just feeling stuck. Like I would look at somebody next to me and see them just effortlessly kick up into a shoulder stand and be happy and graceful there and bring their feet overhead and to plow and be able to interlace their hands behind their back and just be content as a little clam there. And I would be like red faced, all the weight on my neck, struggling, unable to get up, all because of the small little joint here in my shoulders, this little limited joint that was like, hey, oh, hey, that's as far as we go, actually. Please quit trying to make us do that. So there's an example in my own body. Now, then you might say, oh, okay, well, people are either flexible or not flexible in their bone structure in general. Well, not so much, because what I lack in my shoulders, I make up for in my hips. So I have really good internal rotation in my hips. I have good external rotation in my hips. So poses that involve my hips, I'm usually pretty good at, pretty comfortable in. So the reason that I'm using myself as an example is because that's always the safest bet, is to point out that you can't look at a pose and a person practicing the pose and determine whether or not they are an air quotes advanced yogi based on how well they're doing that pose. In fact, I would argue that we shouldn't even say that there are advanced asanas at all. Because what is advanced to someone is simple to someone else. And so, what are we using to gauge these poses? Which poses are advanced? Which poses are beginner? Which poses are intermediate? It's all a moot point when we really understand that every body is different. And so everybody will be able to do different things and not do some things. So that's the first thing I wanted to just poke a little hole in, is this concept of advanced yoga or advanced asana. So that's in general. That's just in the yogaverse. Why are we using the word advanced asana or advanced yoga? It seems very silly to me. And the reason I'm using asana or the physical shapes as the example is because, unfortunately, that's what most Westerners think of as yoga. But if we were thinking of yoga in the grander scheme of things and how it was intended, remember that the asanas are just one tiny little part of the yoga practice, right? The poses originally were designed to create a body that was stable and flexible and strong enough to be able to sit in meditation, so that we could work with our mind. So I would argue that advanced asana is a meditation practice. So that's just in general in the yogaverse. But let's talk a little bit more about trying. And so it's already problematic, right? This idea of advanced yoga, advanced asana, already very problematic for all of the reasons that I just mentioned. It also brings this sort of hustle, goal kind of culture to yoga, which was not how yoga was designed, right? And don't, dear yoga teacher, if you have yoga poses on your vision board, please don't feel called out. I used to as well, until I realized that some of the ones I had on my vision board I'd never be able to do based on my bone structure. So having yoga poses on your vision board as like a goal to get to, or having goal poses, isn't very helpful. And to be honest, if that's the way you want to move your body physically, I think just going to a gym is a better idea. Just, doing some bicep curls, set some goals there. How much weight do you want to lift? And the reasons why being, first of all, you may or may not ever achieve that goal, depending on your personal bone structure, on your body. I often say to my students when I'm teaching, and I find it funny that um, we can all look at each other's outsides and we can say, oh, we're all different. You're tall, you're shorter, you're thin, you're bigger. You have this color of skin and this color of hair and this color of eyes. You have long arms, short arms, etc. Right? We can all see this clearly. We can just go out into the world and look at the beautiful array of human expression and say, all different, all unique. And yet, somehow, we think that when we go under the skin and we remove all of this flesh, that our bones are all the same. And so we should all be able to do the same yoga. That doesn't make any sense at all. And yet, it's what's taught, this is the safe way to do a pose. That's an episode for another time. This is the way, the correct way to do this shape. And if you just keep practicing, you too will be able to do the splits. So this is very problematic and it's not accurate. And when teachers or students hold themselves to some sort of physical goal pose that they try to get to, and they're doing all of these things to try to get to this goal shape, what often can happen is in the very lightest thing would be that they get frustrated and give up. But on a more serious note, injury and some serious injuries. If you look at a lot of the yoga teachers that were teaching kind of pre me, so I've been teaching for at the time of this recording, 20 years. So teachers that have been teaching 30, 40 longer years, especially in some of the styles of yoga where they were told, practice, practice, and all is coming. Or spin-off styles of yoga from styles of yoga like that, where there is this, oh, everybody can do this. If you just keep practicing, you too will be able to do this. In those styles of yoga, what you'll notice is that a lot of the teachers that were teaching it for many, 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 many years either had to stop teaching and practicing that style or remove poses, and several of them have had hip replacements. So pushing and pushing and pushing assertively to get into a pose because it's a goal pose. If your bone structure does not allow for that pose to be expressed in some sort of ease, will result in injury. So that's just something to keep in mind. Whether it's you as a practicing yogi, whether you're a teacher or a member of the public and thinking about your own body, or as teachers, when you're looking at your students' bodies, if you have this idea in your head that if they just keep practicing, eventually they will master this air quotes advanced pose, you could potentially be injuring people and spreading information that is not accurate. So just something to think about and sit with. So if we're all different on the inside, we all got different bones in here, which means that's going to drastically affect what poses we can do, what poses we can't do. Then how do we define advanced yoga? Well, as I mentioned, the original intention of all of these funny shapes that we make with our body was to create a body that was strong and stable enough to sit in meditation. So I might argue, and I will, that actually meditation practice is advanced yoga. So that's in general. But let's talk a little bit more about yin specifically, because sometimes we're, brought up in the general yogaverse Maybe our first styles of yoga were a vinyasa or ashtanga or a hatha or some other style. And then we kind of come into yin. This is really common, right? Where it's like, especially as teachers, your first teacher training was probably not a yin training. And sometimes, but very rarely. And so you kind of come in with all this luggage that you bring in with your first training. And some of this luggage could be a suitcase called one size fits all cueing. Another piece of this luggage could be advanced asana, which is what we'll talk about today. And another piece of this luggage that you're carrying in with you might be this striving, efforting, perfecting, calling yoga a workout, exercise, drills, et cetera, et cetera. So then when you bring all of that messiness into a yin practice, that's probably why someone's going to say, how would you do an advanced yin practice? But here's the thing. All of those things I just described are yang activities, are yang in nature, right? So I'm going to do a very brief yin yang roundup here, but just as a reminder, within the symbol, the black and white symbol, sometimes called the Tai Chi symbol, we have yin and we have yang. And sometimes teachers bring their yang attitude into their yin practice, whether it's their own physical practice, and students do this as well. I see it all the time in my classes. They bring that yang attitude into the yin practice or into teaching yin because they don't have a really deep understanding of what is the difference between yin and yang. So I'm just going to review a couple of things that are yang-like in nature, and then some things that are yin-like in nature as it affects our yoga practice. So if some of you have probably listened to the whole episode on what is yin and yang, if you haven't, you can go back and check that one out. But I'm just going to do a very brief overview. So I was just talking about bringing our yang attitude into our yin yoga practice. So what might be some of these characteristics that we might bring in from these other styles of yoga into a yin practice without being aware of it? So yang qualities in general tend to be bright, boisterous, advancing, extroverted, outward, active. The sky is considered yang. And you're looking at the TCM 5-element tradition, the fire element and the wood element are yang, the sun, daytime, spring, summer, light, upward, dynamic, and hot. So those are just some general yang-like qualities. And then yin-like qualities, I'll go over in a moment. So think about those qualities and how that might relate to yoga. So yang forms of yoga include movement, repetition, striving. There's this sense of like wanting to improve. They're achievement based. They're strengthening. There's effort. There's sun salutations connected to the sun. There's a proprioception, an awareness of like, where is my body in space? Very important if you're in a flow practice to know where your foot's going to land when you step back. There's a sense of flow, whether it's soft or stronger, depending on the style. Increased heart rate. It's more structured. It's more aesthetic. It's more bright, expansive. And the focus is on evolution, right? Progressing, evolving. And they create warmth or heat. So yang styles of yoga tend to strengthen and stretch muscles. There's often a focus on structure, alignment, and what the pose looks like. And yang yoga is more likely to increase the blood flow, the circulation in the body due to its moving and repetitive nature. Okay, so that's sort of a summary of our yang-like qualities. And the reason I wanted to go over those is because I had just said sometimes as teachers or practitioners, we go to other styles of yoga before we end up at yin, and we bring all of that luggage with us, right? We bring the achievement-based piece of luggage. We bring the I'm obsessed with evolution-based piece of luggage. We bring in the striving and efforting piece of luggage with us into our yin practice. But here's the thing. Yin, by its nature, is more dark, quiet, yielding. It's more introverted. And we cultivate interoception. which I can talk more about in a moment. Interoception is an awareness of what's happening inside. So I just mentioned that yang forms of yoga are focused on proprioception. So, what's happening outside of your body. So, if I move my arm here, what's going to happen? If I step my foot here, that kind of thing. But with yin, we're looking at interoception. What's happening inside of me? It's more inward, more still. And the elements that are more yin-like in nature are the earth and the water element, and then metal to some degree as well. The moon, nighttime. The seasons are winter and fall. Yin energy is more heavy, more downward, more passive, more cool or cold. So that just talks briefly about some of the yin qualities. And then how does that affect our yin practice? Well, our yin characteristics, there's going to be more stillness, more quiet. It's more cool. There's more surrender, less efforting. Involution, going inside. Opening, softness. Interoception, again, an awareness of what's happening inside. In a yin practice, we're looking at the function of the pose. Why am I doing this pose? What is the intention? What is the function? It's more freeform, not as structured. It's connected to the moon, to dark, and it's more singular, meaning we don't do repetitive movements because we're still. So a yin practice is more internal. So some of you may not have heard of these terms: exteroception, proprioception, interoception. So very briefly, exteroception is what is happening around me. Proprioception is where is my body in space? Super important in movement forms of yoga, right? We need to know when I lift my leg up in downward dog, am I going to hit that student's head next to me, right? So proprioception. Interoception is what is happening inside of your body. So on the level of more gross to more subtle, exteroception is sort of the most external or gross. Proprioception kind of falls in the middle. And then interoception is the most subtle or the most internal of those three terms. And yin yoga is all about the interoception. That is one of yin yoga's secret superpowers, is this ability to cultivate interoception. So you can see why this might be then a little bit problematic when we're talking about how do we practice advanced yin. Because the intentions of a yin practice are completely different than a movement form of practice. So if you take all of that luggage that you brought from your movement forms of yoga into your yin practice, then you end up doing what we often call in yin circles, practicing your yin yoga with your yang attitude. That efforting, striving, pushing, competing, accomplishing, mastery attitude. When you bring that into yin, that is problematic because it's a very different practice. That's not the intention of a yin practice. I could argue it's not necessarily the intention of other styles of yoga too, but I think we've already addressed that enough in the beginning. So if we acknowledge that we're all different on the inside and our bones are all different, and so therefore we will probably not all do the same versions of poses based on bone limitations. And so these poses that we all call advanced, air quotes again, asana, may or may not be accessible to somebody regardless of how much experience they have. Somebody could be practicing yoga for decades and still not get into one of these poses that has been nicknamed a advanced asana simply based on their bone structure. Whereas somebody else who has very little yoga experience but just happens to be gifted in their bones could master that pose within a few classes. So I'm reminding this of this because even just the premise of advanced asana is ridiculous, frankly. What is advanced for one is easy for someone else. I will tell you, though, that for most human beings and most minds, meditation is advanced for almost everybody. So anybody that starts a meditation practice knows that's hard. That is some hard shit. And it's not just you. If you're thinking you're the only one who can't meditate, oh no, that's universal. Welcome to being human. It is challenging. So I want us to be very aware, first of all, of these little pop culture things that we've picked up from the yogaverse about advanced yoga so that we can start to pick that apart. Does that actually serve us in the yoga world? I would say no, considering that there's a very small percentage of people that are going to be able to even do a lot of those shapes based on their bone structure. I don't think it's very helpful to call that advanced yoga. What if we just called this a yoga pose? That's a yoga pose. We didn't have to put these beginner, intermediate, advanced labels on there. So there's something to think about. But when it comes to yin, again, we want to be really, really careful that we're not pulling all of our suitcases that we have gathered with us from our first trainings about, alignment and practice, and all is coming, and advanced poses and pushing and striving and efforting and, yoga drills and yoga exercise. We're not bringing all of that baggage with us into our yin practice because it doesn't belong there. And again, I would argue it doesn't belong in other practices too, but we won't get into that anymore. I'm going to talk about a yin practice. So then what in the world is an advanced yin practice? Well, let's just ponder that one for a moment, shall we? What in the world could then be an advanced yin practice? So we've got a bit of a framework now. We've discussed how yin is different than sort of movement-based yoga. But let's take a look at another aspect of yin that doesn't get talked about a lot. So yin yoga and sort of the nervous system. So yin yoga can create yin yoga, my goodness, creates a container where the asanas or the poses actually aren't necessarily the primary focus. Like, yeah, we're going to make some shapes with our body, but it's not really the point. It's more about slowing down, paying attention, and really tuning into the body. So that practice again of interoception. Like a meditation practice, this gives the person permission to just be present with all that is in the body in that present moment. So we could say that one of the qualities of an advanced yin yoga practitioner is their ability to be present. Fascia, which is sort of one of yin yoga's secret superpowers, is an incredibly sensitive nervous system conductor in the body. And so this can be one reason why yin yoga can be so nourishing to our parasympathetic nervous system. And then you add to that the conscious act of slowing down, which naturally, for most people, engages our parasympathetic or that rest and digest response in our nervous system. In this space of still and quiet presence, deep healing and profound interconnection can take place. So when you're able to be still and quiet and really drop in, it gives you a whole other aspect of the practice that you can be aware of, that you can't do in a movement-based practice because you have to pay attention to where your foot is and where your hand is and what you're doing because you're moving. But when you're still, it allows us to really drop in. So it's within this space that one can sense or hear or feel the messages that your body is sending you, your energetic body, and maybe even what we might call sort of our higher self. So when we're so busy being a human doing instead of a human being, it's really hard to take an opportunity to drop in, to notice, to observe, to be still. And when we have this opportunity in a practice like yin yoga to intentionally be still and quiet, to take that time to drop in and to cultivate interoception, to start to be aware of your inner landscape, the sensations of the body, emotions, thoughts, etc., then that's a very different practice. So, how do you measure whether or not that's advanced? So, I would argue that advanced yin yoga is an advanced yin yogi is somebody who is okay with being still and quiet and observing what is happening on the inside of them. That is practicing mindfulness, practicing present moment awareness, that is developing and nurturing that witnessing consciousness, that part of them that is able to stand just a little bit outside of their direct, sort of more charged experience and observe. So yin yoga cultivates all of that. Present moment awareness and understanding of what's happening inside of our body, whether that's easy or not. Like anyone who's practiced yin at a really trying time in their life can tell you that's some hard shit to do, right? I did a whole episode called Yin Yoga is Hardcore. So sitting still and quiet with the stuff that comes up, whether that be physical, mental, emotional, energetic, et cetera, that is advanced yoga. So I would argue, and I might be biased, that practicing yin yoga, period, is advanced yoga. Now, does that mean that you can't be a beginner and a practice yin? Of course you can. That might be a whole podcast episode on its own. But yes, I'm not saying that you need a whole bunch of previous yoga experience to practice yin yoga, not at all. Instead, it's the attitude that makes it advanced yoga, not your experience level. Experience level and ability to make pretzel shapes with your body is not what I would consider advanced yoga. You either got that or you don't. It's based on your bones and some practice. What I consider advanced yoga is, are we able to use our yoga practice to help us when we're not on our yoga mat? So are we able to be still, to be quiet, to be reflective? Are we able to be present during challenging things in our yin practice, like thoughts and feelings and sensations in the body? And are we able to stay and observe and develop that sense of introception and patience? If we're doing that on a regular basis, then that helps us learn to respond to life instead of react to life. So when I can sit on my yoga mat in a yin practice and observe the sensations in my hamstring and notice that sensation of stretch, and then also notice my impatience with that, and maybe my boredom and my fidgetiness and all the thoughts that are running amok in my head, but I'm able to stay present and observe all of that, witness all of that with the part of our mind, which we all have, by the way, you just may not be paying attention to yours. There is, all of us have this part of our mind that is able to just slightly step outside of your direct experience and witness or watch what's happening, right? It's the part of you that is aware that you're aware. And when we do practice yin regularly or meditation, we cultivate and we strengthen and we learn how to be in that sort of witnessing consciousness. It becomes more readily available for us in our daily lives and on our yoga mat. And then we're able to, not only on our yoga mat, but when we're out in the world with all of the stuff that happens and all the other people, we're more able to find that inner resource again. Because we've practiced it on our mat. We've practiced sitting, being observant, being patient, being curious, going inward, practicing mindfulness, cultivating introception. When we do all of that regularly on our yoga mat, then that's easier to do when we're out in the real world, which is kind of the point to me. If you practice yoga every single day and you still go out into the world and aren't very kind and you're like an asshole to people, then what are you doing while you're on that yoga mat? So, in my opinion, that's advanced yoga. So, advanced yoga is realizing that actually the point of yoga isn't these funny shapes we make with our bodies at all. And then, if these funny shapes we make with our body aren't the point at all, if we're not using these asana shapes, these poses, as a way to determine what's advanced and what's not advanced, because as I mentioned earlier, doesn't matter how much experience you have, you may never be able to do certain poses. So if that's the aha that you have, that's like, oh, I've been thinking of advanced yoga as these funny shapes, these asanas that we make with our body. But actually, it doesn't matter how experienced somebody is, how much practice they do, they may or may not ever be able to master that pose. And so then what is advanced yoga if it's not based on experience and practice, which I think it should be? Advanced yoga, experience, practice. That's a start. Not what shapes you make with your body, but how do you feel about those shapes that you make with your body? So, when we bring again all of this sort of cultural baggage of advanced yoga into a yin practice, and all of these things like pushing yourself, efforting, striving, all of that stuff, when we pull that into our yin yoga, then we're actually doing our yin yoga with our yang attitude. And I can see this often in my classes. I can see students sort of, especially in, say, for example, half butterfly. Oh my God, it's like they think they're not doing the pose right if they're not touching their foot. It's ridiculous. And so they're white knuckling it and their veins are bulging and they're turning red because they think the goal, air quotes again, of that pose is to get your hand to your foot. What if the goal was, do you notice sensation in your body in a 50 to 60-degree amount? And can you sit and be present to that without the mind kind of going on adventures? And when it does go on adventures, can you be gentle and compassionate with yourself and still have the dedication to bring it back? Because that, my friends, is practicing advanced yoga, in my humble opinion. Okay, I think you get the point. So next time you're hesitant to go, what do I teach? How do I teach advanced yoga, advanced yin yoga? Just take a moment to remember this podcast. Now, that being said, there are different experience levels, right? But describing these experience levels as, beginner, intermediate, advanced, maybe not be so helpful. Beginner is a little bit more helpful because if somebody's brand new, they are a beginner. But again, intermediate, maybe if you use intermediate, meaning they have some experience, they're not an absolute beginner, then okay. But advanced, if you're an advanced yogi, you are an enlightened being, my friend, because you have spent the time to deal with your mind and you've let all of this minutia of our daily lives go. So maybe we can stop trying to practice advanced yin yoga, because unless you're doing meditation, I don't think there is such a thing as advanced yin yoga. Now, if you're a teacher and you're thinking, yeah, but I have this group of students and they've all been practicing yin for a long time and I feel like I need to give them more. Well, here's a question. Do you feel like you need to give them more, or are they requesting more? This could be a whole episode too in the future, but because as teachers, we tend to think that they need more. We tend to think they must be bored. They need more. When meanwhile, they're actually just fine doing what they're doing. They like this delightfully simple practice. They like a reliable practice that is familiar because that's more soothing to their nervous system. So don't assume just because you have been doing the same shapes over and over again, which if you're teaching yin, you probably have because there's only so many to do. Don't assume that that means that your students are bored, that your students need more, your students want more of a challenge. That might not be the case at all. That might just be something you are telling yourself because you feel like you have to keep offering more. and they might be just fine. So that's one thing to consider. And then the other thing to consider is if you're thinking, yeah, but I need to give my students more, or maybe my students have asked for more. Well, if they're asking for advanced yin or intermediate yin, one thing that could help with that is to create a registered series, so not a drop-in, that helps them go from point A to point B in a deeper way, right? That's when you can bring in some themes, whatever you've studied. I tend to use traditional Chinese medicine because that's my foundation. That's what I've studied. Maybe then you can dive deeper into some deeper topics. So when you have a group that has experience with the poses, maybe you can introduce some more soulful themes to that group. Maybe it doesn't have to be the sort of new to yin speech and now feel the rebound, because they know all that. They've been doing it this whole time. Now, maybe as a teacher, you get to challenge yourself to speak more to their inner journey instead of focusing on the asanas as a way to make this a more, air quotes, advanced practice. Maybe you get to speak more to the inner journey. Maybe that now informs your lesson plans. Maybe you start to guide those students through meditation if you have a meditation practice, the training and experience to do so. So maybe when you have a, air quotes, advanced yin class, you're spending some time in seated meditation. Maybe. So, dear teacher, I'm not suggesting that you should do all of these things if you don't have experience and training in them. Like if you've never guided meditation, if you don't have a meditation practice, please don't try to guide your students through meditation. But if you do, now's where this comes in with your intermediate students, with your experienced students, the ones who no longer need to hear the 8 different ways that they could choose to explore this pose based on their bone structure, because they already know, because they've been doing yin for a long time and they know it works for their bodies. And, these are the students that are already halfway in the pose before you've even finished describing it, because they know what works for them. They've got their props if needed, they're doing their thing. So if you've got students like that, then maybe it's time to take them out of a drop-in class and create a small series where you can dive deeper into a particular subject, a little more soulful of a practice, a little less kind of based on the physical, including more meditative aspects, etc. So that's some food for thought. Because if, dear yin yoga teacher, you think that you're going to guide your students through an advanced asana class by just making them hold the poses longer, which may or may not be part of an intermediate or experienced practice, or by them going deeper, air quotes, into the pose, then you're missing the point of yin. And just to address the longer holds, there's nothing wrong with doing longer holds in a practice. From my experience with myself and my students, if you are no longer feeling the shape, you're no longer feeling that sweet rebound in the shape when you come out, when you've done these shorter holds in the 2 to 5 minute range, then maybe you do start to increase the length of hold in a practice. But if you were doing that in a group scenario, you would probably want to do two times. Like you might want to say, okay, this has been 5 minutes. Those of you who've had enough, come out. And this is, we're going to continue on for a couple more, whatever. Because even if they've been practicing yin for a long time, there's a huge percentage of people that do not need to do longer holds because they're still feeling plenty in their body, especially if they're practicing yin just sort of weekly with you and not doing a home practice. So there's some thoughts on advanced yin yoga. Probably not always popular opinions, but nonetheless. So for those of you who clicked on this all excited thinking, yes, I'm going to learn how to teach advanced yoga, advanced yin yoga, then learn how to guide meditation. Start practicing meditation. Start excavating some of these deeper learnings that the yin practice can bring us. That's what I would call advanced yin yoga. Okay, friends, that's all for today. I think that's plenty of food for thought. And until I see you again, bye for now.